Last month, the military tribunal in southern Russia delivered its verdict on Pavlo Hryb, a 20-year-old from Kiev, Ukraine.
Defendant, you are found guilty of the crime listed in Part 1 of Article 205 of the Penal Code of the Russian Federation. You are sentenced to 6 years deprivation of liberty. Do you understand?
Yes.
The young man says he confessed under police torture. Though seriously ill, he started a hunger strike. A few days later, in Kiev, Pavlo's father is doing the rounds of Ukrainian TV stations. He says it's important that people know how his son was arrested.
The Russian secret services exploited a teenage girl, a minor, whom Pavlo was chatting with on social networks in order to lure him outside of Ukraine, kidnap him and take him to Russia. And then they threw these absurd accusations at him, saying he had tried to persuade this young girl to commit a terrorist act at her high school graduation party.
This evening, Espresso TV is hosting a special show about Ukrainian political prisoners detained by Russia.
We invite our viewers to join in the discussion on today's topic. Did you know that you can support our compatriots held in Kremlin captivity by writing letters to them?
In Ukraine, the public is deeply concerned about the fate of these 100 or so prisoners. But in Russia, barely anyone ever talks about them. The Kremlin continues to deny any role in the conflict in Ukraine and to spread virulent anti-Ukrainian propaganda. There are just a few activists in Moscow who keep up a daily presence in front of the presidential administration, calling for a prisoner exchange.
We're here to try to raise public awareness. It's important to tell people the truth. And people stop and ask us questions. Because there's nothing about this on television. It's a taboo topic here.
The topic did make headlines last November, though. The Russian Navy blocked the passage of 3 Ukrainian ships through the Kerch Strait off Crimea, which Russia annexed from Ukraine 5 years ago. 3 Ukrainian sailors were wounded in the clashes. Their ships were captured, along with their crew, 24 men in total. They have been transferred to this Moscow prison and await trial on charges of illegally crossing the Russian border.
The Russian authorities refuse to apply international law. They refuse to recognize these soldiers as prisoners of war. To my mind, it's clear that unless there's strong political pressure, they will not be freed.
The Ukrainian authorities say they have made 13 appeals to the Russians for a prisoner swap. Kiev also holds a number of Russian prisoners accused of taking part in the conflict in eastern Ukraine. But when asked about this, the Russian Foreign Ministry offered only this evasive statement.
Defending the rights and the interests of our Russian compatriots who are imprisoned or pursued anywhere in the world is a top priority for the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
It doesn't look that way from Kiev, according to Ukraine's human rights ombudswoman.
We sent 23 requests to Vladimir Putin from Russian citizens who are in prison here in Ukraine who want to be exchanged in return for the release of Ukrainian political prisoners. Even then, there was no reply.
Twice, Ludmila Denісова made it to the gates of this penal colony in the far north of Russia. But both times she was refused permission to visit Oleg Sentsov, who's being held here. The Ukrainian filmmaker, who's serving a 20-year sentence, went on hunger strike last year for 146 days, demanding the release of all the Ukrainian political prisoners. In vain. In Sentsov's native Crimea, opponents of the annexation are systematically repressed even now. His mother is losing hope of ever seeing him again.
Я очень верила, что его отпустят. Вот почему-то, когда вот так народ поднялся и как-то люди просили за него, да, я очень верила, что отпустят, и потом, а сейчас я уже не верю в это. Не знаю, что будет. Дети растут без папы.
When Sentsov started his hunger strike, there were around 70 political prisoners. Counting the sailors, there are now nearly 100. And negotiations seem to be at a standstill.